Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction tech or weekly global Passive House showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle.
It's December, Zach. It's summertime for me.
Oh, yeah, it is not
officially summer.
It is not summertime for me. No, it's been insanely rainy. We're getting all these atmospheric rivers. You know, the Pineapple Express continues.
Atmospheric rivers.
Yes. So we're getting really moisture-laden air funneling like a river directly toward the Pacific Northwest, as that air is coming from south of Hawaii.
Wow.
So we've had, I think, a series of four, and the first one was pretty devastating, especially for British Columbia. But now we're kind of getting more rain on top of rain. So at the moment, it's not that bad, but.
Meanwhile, I just installed my 2,800 litre rainwater harvesting tank. So I'm kind of looking forward to some rain. It's been a while in Auckland. I'm predicting that it might be a bit of a dry summer here. Yeah. So hopefully I haven't missed the last before topping up the tank in preparation for summer. But there you go. It's good to get it in.
Yeah. Congrats with that. It'll be helpful.
Bit of a mission.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, well, let's get on to this week's episode. We're sticking in Australia this time round, and got an exciting interview coming up about quite a groundbreaking project there because of the nature of where it's come from and who's driving that project. But before we get into that, let's thank our sponsors.
Yeah, definitely. So our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minitaire All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Hartel, RDH Building Science, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors and SIGA, and our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. So Bohemia Hookham is a registered architect. She's also a certified Passive House designer, and she's been working on Passive House projects for the last 3 years at DesignInc most recently. Her Passive House journey began with single-family homes, as it does with a lot of people, and has now extended towards delivering the Glenroy Community Hub, which is targeting both Passive House and Living Building Challenge PETAL certification. Now, Living Building Challenge is pretty strenuous. Of course, we know that Passive House has got a pretty high standard as well, but to do the two together is pretty amazing. I really like the emphasis that Bohemia has on regenerative design and biophilic architecture. Combined with Passive House, she is promoting that as an exemplary way to achieve healthy, resilient, and energy-efficient building solutions while also reducing carbon. So this is pretty impressive project because it's being driven by a local council as opposed to just a private building owner. And that always has some challenges, but it's really exciting to see that a public entity like that is starting to pick up on the benefits of Passive House and driving that. I should also mention that Bohemia is a member of the board now of the Australian Passive House Association. So I hope you enjoy this. This is my chat with Bohemia Hookham from DesignInc in Australia. Well, thank you for your time, Bohemia, and really great to connect, as always, with architects who are doing some really great stuff. But let's go back a little bit and talk about how you got into architecture in the first place.
Okay, so I think I knew I wanted to study architecture from as a kid. I was very spatially aware. Really liked looking at floor plans. My parents also built their own house. So it was always something I wanted to study. So after high school, I went and did a gap year and lived in Argentina for a year. And then, learnt Spanish, and that was fun.
What did you do there?
I went to high school, lived in a host family situation, and did a year of high school again.
So you finished school, but then went and did another year of high school, just kind of as a cultural exchange.
Yes, yeah.
Awesome.
So that was fun, and everyone there was telling me I had to be good at maths because architecture is all about that. And I was good at maths, but it wasn't like a genius at it or anything.
But you already knew you were going into architecture school when you came back to Australia.
So came back. I grew up in Brisbane, but then when I came back to Australia, I moved to Melbourne to study. So I started doing my undergrad degree at the University of Melbourne in 2012. Did that for 3.5 years with a diploma of Spanish as well.
Nice.
And then once I finished that, I started doing my master's straight away and started working as a student at a kind of mid-size, commercial practice. And I was kind of introduced to sustainability formally in architecture at uni and kind of just stuck to that, was really keen on it.
How well do you think, in your experience, did university cover sustainability?
I think it depends who's talking about it. I had a really fantastic lecturer, and later on was my independent thesis supervisor, Dominique Hess, and she talks about regenerative design, which is so much better than sustainability. I think we need to stop talking about sustainability. And because it's just about doing the kind of baseline minimum to maintain what we're already doing.
Yep.
So that really, this idea of regenerative design really transformed my thinking, was like a light bulb moment for me for thinking about how we need to do better.
So going beyond just flat line of not being any less bad, or more bad, whatever it is, double negative. Stop trying to do less bad in terms of design, but actually thinking about how can we make the world a better place through design, not just a less bad one.
Exactly. Yeah. How can we create a positive impact? And it's also talking about not just sustainability in the world of architecture, but it's kind of these 3 pillars of social, economic, and I suppose environmental, obviously, and connects all of those in a really holistic way. So that really transformed my thinking. But without that, I don't think I would have thought about sustainability in the same way that I do now.
So it's a little bit hit and miss at university, depending on
I think so.
Who you happen to have as a lecturer or a mentor.
Yeah.
Just on that point about sustainability and making things better by design, is that possible in the built sector? Because buildings have such an impact on not just where that building sits, but all of the resources and materials that we accumulate from around the world to put that building together. Is it possible to do regenerative design in a modern urban setting?
I think it's challenging, and it's also about where are you drawing the boundaries in terms of the assessment, and how we can potentially look at life cycle analysis on all projects. But this is something that always comes up when you talk about passive house, is that there's so much more embodied energy in producing these windows, which are double or triple glazed with thermally broken frames. And, is it really creating a positive impact in the end? And I don't think we're completely there yet. I think there's more that we need to do, but part of it is about having an electricity grid which is completely renewable, and moving towards...
Not easy to do in Australia.
No, exactly.
Lots of brown coal.
Yep. But I think it's a process. I feel like as a society we are making better moves towards that, but I don't know if there is that real holistic, regenerative kind of solution yet in architecture. I think it's an industry that's generally slow moving as well in terms of making change. You think about what people are doing with passive house in Europe and where we are here, and it's we are miles behind everyone else.
What's your response to that question of embodied energy, embodied carbon on really high performance products and materials, especially when in this part of the world we're often importing those from as far away as you possibly could get? If you get challenged on that, or even if you're challenged in your own mind, how do you resolve that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the solution, or part of the solution, is to really increase what we have available locally. Mm-hmm. We need to get if you're using a timber structure on a project, can you get all the timber, source all of that locally? Can you use locally manufactured windows as well? And potentially, are there other options for airtightness layers sometimes as well that maybe aren't as used here in Australia?
Right.
I think it's about localizing the market as much as possible to reduce those travel emissions. But part of that is that we need the supply chain to grow so much here as well. Yeah. And it's already making leaps in the past few years. We've seen a lot of growth, I think, in what's available locally for passive house projects, but still a long way to go.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. And I guess that is, you said it's part of a journey, and I guess that's an important part as well, that you can't do everything perfectly right now, but that's not a good reason to not do it slightly better, because you're encouraging the industry to move in that direction.
Yes, of course. It's baby steps, I think, sometimes, and in other projects or situations you can take larger leaps, but still we should be moving forwards as much as possible in everything that we do.
Well, let's jump into the Glenroy Community Hub, because that's a bit of a giant leap in the evolution of passive house in Australia. Tell us what the Community Hub is.
Yeah, so basically it is a community centre in Glenroy, which is located about 20 kilometres north of Melbourne CBD. So it's part of Moreland City Council, which has suburbs like Brunswick, which people would probably be more familiar with. But it's basically a combination of multiple uses within the one building. So it's predominantly a library, but then we have a maternal child health centre, a co-health centre, and an early learning facility as well, all within the same building. So the site was purchased by Moreland City Council, I think about 20 years ago, and it had an old primary school on it which wasn't used anymore. So they used it for some community activities. People could rent out the space. So that heritage building we had to retain as part of the new project.
Yeah.
And so the building it's quite large. It's 4,500 square meters. It's predominantly one story, but there is an element of 2 stories. It is concrete blockwork, veneer, has cement sheet, cladding in other areas. And the really fascinating thing as well is that it's also targeting Living Building Challenge pedal certification. So it's doing a lot. It's kind of Moreland City Council wanted us to go for both Passive House and Living Building Challenge certification at the same time. And
did they know what they were getting into when they?
Well, this is their first try at it, so I don't think anyone knew what they were getting into. But it's really fantastic, I think, to combine multiple certifications where Passive House is targeting the building performance.
Yeah.
But it's not addressing all of the other, I guess, holistic arms of sustainability and regenerative design that are looking at social impact and the community, which is where that ties in really well with the Living Building Challenge. So it's a really beautiful building, I think, and it's about bringing people together, but then also providing a refuge for when you've got these really crazy heat waves or bushfires.
Was that part of the decision to go for concrete?
What we have concrete in the slab.
Yeah.
You mean the concrete blockwork?
Yeah.
That was an aesthetic architectural decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Michael Ingui, who's one of the founders of the Passive House Accelerator, talks about beyond Passive House, the concept beyond Passive House. And when you're talking about that combination of ratings or systems, tools, I think this is a really good example of that because, like you say, Passive House does the energy, health and comfort part really, really well.
Yeah.
And opens the door, I think, to then doing things like Living Building Challenge that have these other aspects of material selection, toxic materials, but then also going even beyond that and looking at community and well-being and how does it fit within the environment around it, the other urban environment around it. So I really like that, thinking of Passive House as a bit of a cornerstone or a foundation for going beyond just the energy, health and comfort a bit.
Yeah.
But by doing that well, it allows you to have broader thinking of overall regenerative design, going beyond sustainability, which is
exactly
like you talked about. It is a big project. There's a number of parties involved, and like any of these headline projects, lots of people want to sort of hitch their brand to it. But what part have you played in the design, and can you tell us a bit about how many other parties or some of the big people involved in it?
Yeah, sure. So I started working on the project. So I work at DesignInc. I'm a registered architect and certified Passive House designer. And I started working on the project at the construction design documentation phase. So it had already gone through design documentation, gone to tender, and a builder had been assigned the contract. So my role was to work on the construction documentation, finalize all of that, and then once that was sorted, it was dealing with the on-site construction administration to deliver the actual building. And so, as I mentioned before, the client was or is Moreland City Council, and they were the ones who put this on the table in terms of what they wanted to do. It wasn't part of the design brief from the initial phase of the project. So during schematic design, they started to talk about introducing Passive House, but it was only introduced kind of formally during the design documentation. So the building as itself was not designed initially to be a Passive House project. So
right,
it did make, yeah. So it made for some complex, I guess, thermal bridge gymnastics to overcome detailing that we just had to stick with because we'd gone through town planning. We had to keep the building as it was. We'd already gone through all this stage of documentation. So we had to just get some junctions and details to work a lot harder than they might have had to if they were designed otherwise.
So now that we've mentioned concrete block, I assume that have you got some external insulation going on with that?
We have a lot of. So at the base of the concrete block work, we've got Novamure blocks, which are those kind of glass reinforced fibre blocks with polystyrene that act as a thermal break. And then
which is relatively, that'd be pretty uncommon in Australia at this stage.
They had to get imported.
Wow. Yeah.
And so they run around the base of the entire block work where it hits the ground. And then that ties into our slab edge insulation as a continuous insulation detail.
Yeah.
But then
I can see all the architects like picturing this in their mind as you're describing it, they're getting excited about it.
The other thing we had to use as well to deal with the block work was actually a steel frame. So the building surprisingly has a lot of steel in it for a Passive House project.
And the Living Building Challenge project.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so on the Living Building Challenge, though, we didn't actually address the materials component of it because we're just going for petal certification. So it only addresses certain petals. Yep. And we decided to not go for materials because it was going to be too challenging in terms of where we were at with the project and the design and the cost implications. So, yeah, it's got a lot more steel than most Passive House buildings would have. And to deal with that as well, we have a lot of isocorbs, which is another thermal break product, which basically sits in between two steel elements and allows bolts to run through them. It's not a perfect thermal break, but it allows you to break the steel thermally in certain junctions. So we had to do quite in-depth analysis to make sure those details were achieving the right, values. So the builder, the head contractor is Building Engineering. They were awarded the contract. And then they decided to subcontract Luke Plowman from Detail Green to help
Friend of the show.
Yes.
Yeah. Past guest.
Yes, to help us with the thermal bridge detailing through the construction documentation phase. So we've got Claire Parry as the certifier, and then Luke was there helping us with resolving all of our detailing. So we had a lot of workshops which were all online because we're all in lockdown. So it was the builders, it was Luke, it was the architects, it was the structural engineers, sometimes with the mechanical engineers as well. And we'd pull up the model, the 3D model, and we'd pull up drawings and we'd draw on top of things and we'd sit there for like 2-3 hours and just have this massive debrief and we'd sketch over things, and then everyone would kind of go away feeling exhausted after. Yeah. And then we'd kind of work out how we were going to go from there, and Luke would do some calcs and check if it was all okay. So it's a really great process.
Is that commonplace, that process? I mean, we talk about that sort of integrated design process, getting everyone involved as desirable, but in your experience in an architecture firm, does it happen very often?
Not really. I think because if we didn't do this, we wouldn't be achieving Passive House certification in terms of the thermal bridging details. It was a contractual obligation from the builder side. So they really pushed for this.
But even having that builder on board, I don't know how the council managed to do that, because their normal process, I would have thought, to be go out to tender once detailed design is done. So even having the builder on board at that such early stage is a way better way of doing it. But interesting that the council was able to a public entity was able to do that.
Yeah, well, it did go out to tender after detailed design, and then we were.
Oh, so this was re-workshopping.
Yeah, so we basically had to redo all of our wall build-ups,
right,
and all of our window detailing and everything, basically, after the design documentation phase. That was part of the challenge as well, was that because the Passive House kind of certification got introduced late, a lot of the build-ups and the detailing was not properly resolved.
Yeah. Which is, that's hard because you doing that, it's rework, which is expensive, it's time consuming, it's probably a bit frustrating. So were you doing the PHPP?
No, so we had Gregory Mason from WSP, so he's based in Brisbane. So we had with a lot of commercial scale projects, there's a huge team of consultants involved. So we had WSP as the electrical, fire, mechanical, ESD, and Passive House consultants. And so he was doing all of that, but I did request that he sent it to me, and I went through it. And when I was going through it, I realized that there were a lot of things from DD that had been assumed, and that was when I kind of pushed to rework all of the wall build-ups and everything, because there's a lot of information that we hadn't been provided with from the council in terms of like equipment that's going to be in the building, and because it obviously when you're doing the Passive House PHPP calcs, it needs to be really specific to make sure you're getting an accurate heat loss and gain. So there was a lot of assumptions made about occupancy and all of that needed to be defined so that we could actually get the documents accurate and ready for construction. But it was really good, I think, from the architect side to have someone like myself who could look at the PHPP and see what was needed and what information we still need to work out. Or detail better.
Yeah.
So it's that was really cool experience to be the kind of go-between.
It sounds invaluable to have someone who is talking to the PHPP consultant and all the other engineers and designers, knowing the language of Passive House, because otherwise the danger is you just outsource all the Passive House stuff to someone else, and then something gets lost in translation, coming back to all those things that you're talking about, and looking through the purpose, the uses of this building. There's a library in there, kindergarten, maternal child health services.
Yep.
So there's a pretty broad range of uses within the building, which I guess two main problems that stick out for me is you never know how many people are going to be inside at any one time. And it could be very small, could be very large. If they have people, I guess they'd have meeting rooms that you can have large groups of people potentially. But some of those would require equipment that I imagine put out a fair bit of heat as well.
Mm. Yeah, so there are obviously certain assumptions that still need to be made because people will bring in their own laptops, and if you imagine you've got at least 60 people who come and sit in the library all day, and they each bring laptops and phones, and they're all charging that stuff. That's all generating heat. So there has been a lot of assumptions and averages assumed,
which is normally stuff that you just wouldn't even consider on a typical building, right?
Yeah.
But it becomes quite important when every kilowatt of heat is going to be measured.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where's the project at now?
So the construction is due for completion the end of January, but it will only be opening to the public in March. So getting pretty close now. Still haven't done the final blower door test.
Right.
So we're waiting for that eagerly. But we've done a lot of blower door tests. It's kind of I've listened to a lot of lectures and presentations, passive house projects from around the world, and one of the things that I took away was the smoke test that you do on the first installed window to see if the way it's been installed is something that it's actually working from a air tightness perspective. So I got in contact with the builder and said, we need to do this. Like, you guys need to do this as soon as possible. And the windows failed terribly. So they had to go back and they realized that all the gaskets had been damaged. They had to add in extra silicone everywhere.
So the actual window failed, not the connection of the window to the wall.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
And were they local or were they imported?
They're imported from Belgium.
So you can't just easily send them back to the factory and
No. Well, they came all in components that were then assembled on site.
Right.
So they had enough of the components to kind of cut them down to size where they needed and adjust things and stuff. But it was quite a process to get them as tight as they ended up being. I can't remember off the top of my head what they were, but I think they got down to like 0.3 or 0.4, just the window,
for the window
itself. But that doesn't account for the whole building. So,
but also good on you for taking that step, because it would be a bit embarrassing to get there with the cameras rolling for the final blow door test. have all the smoke pouring out of all the windows.
Yeah. No, it was a really good learning experience, and then we also we've got efficiency matrix as the guys doing the blower door testing.
Yeah.
And so then once we got to the stage where we could start testing the entire building, we got them in to do that. So we've done multiple tests, but not the final one yet.
And is the whole? We'll put some links up so people can have a look. But is it all one envelope, or are there different cells within that you test separately?
No, it's all one envelope. Yeah, but the heritage building has been excluded from it.
Is that the little brick house in the corner?
Yeah.
I was wondering about that. It's almost like this typical kind of mid-century Australian little house there with a modern building stuck onto it.
Yeah. So that's the old primary school, and the Passive House Institute in Germany allowed us to exclude it. Which is, I think it could have been done, but it would have had a significant cost implication to try and get it there,
right?
Rework everything.
But I mean, it's cool to have it there. It sort of anchors the whole building in the heritage and the surrounding, and it's a real nod to the heritage of the area. So it is cool to have it. So how many blower doors will you need for the final test?
They indicated they'd probably use 2 fans on the one blower door.
Which is pretty impressive given the size of the building.
Yeah. But at the moment, when we've been doing the testing, it's just been with 1 fan, 1 blower door.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to report back in, and no doubt people will be watching to see what the final result is.
Yeah.
So it is a bit of a jump forward. Do you know off the top of your head what some of the firsts are for this building in Australia?
If it achieves certification,
You mean when it achieves
certification? Yeah. It'll be the first certified Passive House community centre library. It won't be the first early learning centre. I think it will be the first building that in the southern, maybe not in the southern hemisphere, but in Australia, that is targeting both Living Building Challenge pedal certification and Passive House.
Yeah.
I'm also not sure if there's any other buildings. Actually,
someone will correct us.
Yeah. Oh.
The exciting thing for me with these types of buildings is the community aspect and the the fact there's a public building, it's a council initiative, which changes the paradigm away from high-end architecturally designed houses, which are beautiful and amazing and great to have. But this shows that passive house can be for everyone and should be for everyone, and for different use types. And so hats off to the council, I think, for having the confidence to go there. I don't know how that exactly happened, but I would imagine that there would be one or two key people within that council who made that decision at some point and said, this is where we need to go.
Yes, no, that's definitely something that we all need to push for more. What Moreland City Council did on this journey, I think, is fantastic, and I hope that they want to continue and do more in the future. But it's been a really fantastic journey to go down with them. And it's, as you're saying, like if you think about the non-residential passive house certified buildings in Australia, we've got the Monash Uni ones, which is privately funded. We've got the Torrens Centre, which is the childcare centre in Canberra. There's also the Fern, which is that multi-res apartment in Sydney, which is still residential, but it's multi-res. And there's kind of not much else, so it's a lot of it is public or privately funded initiatives. And for a council to take on something like this with government money, really, I think is really bold, and
absolutely,
we need to see more of this.
Definitely. Well, let's hope we do. Thank you for your time, Bohemia. It's great to find out more about the process of creating buildings like this from the inside. So many people involved in it, and I think it is going to be inspiring for the industry. And so I hope other public bodies will pick up on this and run with it. So we'll have to check in again early next year, see how things go with that airtightness test and the final parts of the certification. So good luck to the team.
Yeah, thank you.
Bohemian Hookham there. She was describing the amazing journey of the Glenroy Community Hub, which you can check out if you just search up Glenroy. We put some links up in the show notes as well. But have a look at the pictures there. It's a pretty impressive looking building, and really challenging what passive house looks like and what these public spaces look like, particularly in the Australian environment. What do you think, Zach?
Oh, great interview, and what a striking design as well. I think definitely encourage people to take a look at the images of the project. And you mentioned at the top of the show the fact that this was from a local council, and I think it drives home how important local government leadership is in spurring on adoption of passive house, especially in these early stages of market adoption. To show what can be done, and this is another example of how broad the kind of aesthetic design palette can be as well, which is I think helpful for architects to see and dispel some maybe myths about what passive house has to look like.
Absolutely, and I think that's really important for Australia, New Zealand, but anywhere closer to the equator than Germany or Northern Europe, because other aspects become so much more important, like the awareness of what happens in summer and what we do with indoor, outdoor flow, having spaces, because we do have, I guess, more time of the year. We've got temperate type of climate. It's actually quite pleasant outside. So we don't have necessarily large chunks of the winter where we just want to have like almost an airlock between outside and inside. We do want to have that airtight construction and have a good boundary, but we also need to be conscious of how people use the surrounding environments and how it relates to that. And of course, overheating is going to be more and more of an issue. And I'm having more conversations with people recently about not just using the current climate files, but also being conscious of embedding future climate models into their plan to say, how will this, assuming this building is going to be around for 50 plus years, what will 10% exceedance of summer high temperatures look like in that scenario?
Right. Yeah. We need to take a look at where things look like they're heading and do some future proofing for sure.
The other thing that I think is going to be most obvious when people first look at some of the images of this project, some of the renders will be a roof half filled with solar panels and say, oh, look, it must be a green building. And that's tempting to, it certainly catches the eye. But as with most passive house buildings, it's more about what's inside the building that makes it energy efficient. That is literally the icing on the cake with the solar panels and being able to ideally produce more and be energy, be producing more energy than what it's using. Where it really performs is in the details and the air tightness and the construction elements. So those reductions of thermal bridges that Bohemia talked about, which is one of the big things you had to sort of jump in pretty early on in the project to make sure that they weren't going to have problems with big steel beams poking through the building envelope.
Yeah, and good on the local council for recognizing those less visible elements, but absolutely critical elements of a sustainable design, or hopefully we're on that pathway to regenerative design that Bohemia mentioned. And even at a fairly late stage, even though it was at a fairly late stage, right? That adding the passive house piece was happened after a lot of the design had already been completed. So that I guess pointed to a couple of the things that I thought were really notable in terms of Bohemia's practice, the way that she worked to facilitate the delivery of passive house details in collaboration with the team, and that integrated design process that ended up being critical to make, basically enabled passive house to be possible in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that really stood out for me with her practice was that intervention she made on the window installation and the checking with the smoke stick test, insisting that happen, after the first window or first couple of windows were installed, and the fact that they found major problems with the windows themselves, but were at an early enough stage they were able to address those. So I thought that was important leadership on her part as a designer, and also pointed to the power of the knowledge sharing in the passive house community, because she knew to do that thanks to all the presentations she's seen around the world. So it's just a reminder that for all you architects out there who are carving time out to make presentations about your projects with for your peers, it can be really important and really vital to successful adoption of passive house around the world. Because if projects, relatively high profile projects like this don't do well, that's going to really slow down passive house in the marketplace. So
someone may be listening to your presentation.
That's right. Right. It's
make all the difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the butterfly effect.
It totally is. And similar to that, I think that a real power of a building like this is that it's going to be visited by thousands of people.
Right.
And
good point.
Just think about the impact that that's going to have on a hot summer's day when people go to this, they visit this place.
Yes.
It's like, oh,
yes,
it's really comfortable in here.
Right.
And that might just be where they leave it, but others might think about, why is it so comfortable in here? Or same in, freezing cold in the middle of winter, because it does get cold in Australia, and going and it's quite warm and pleasant, but there's still fresh air in here. How does that I wonder how that works. And isn't this a really comfortable place to be? So the more people experience that, then they start to ask questions about why aren't all buildings like this? And also that it's just so positive that a council is driving this, because it's really hard to convince a council that knows nothing about passive house to do passive house. But when you have someone, obviously there's someone in that council who's been kind of leading this, but to have that and then to produce a building like this, I would be very surprised if other buildings don't follow, whether they're residential buildings or other community type buildings, recreation centres, whatever, doesn't really matter, because this hopefully will be just the start of more to come.
Yeah, absolutely. So key.
Awesome. All right. What have we got coming up in Passive House world?
Well, at the Accelerator, we have a packed week. So on Tuesday, our time, so Wednesday, your time, Passive House Accelerator Construction Tech will feature Sai Safi of Uber Green Space and Homes. And he'll be talking about a Louisville, Kentucky commercial passive house. And the title of this is Uber Great PHK Ups. So I won't pronounce that so that we don't get banned from podcast.
You think they might have made
channels.
some mistakes along the way that they want to talk about?
Right, which is always really fun, right, for practitioners to and all of us to kind of see the mistakes and understand the learning process. So
Sounds like he might have been hanging out with Sean for a bit too long.
it's very possible. It is very possible.
I don't think Sean has the letter F on his computer keyboard anymore.
No, I think PH is getting worn out on his keyboard. So Sai is a good friend, and I can't wait to see his presentation next Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, our time, so Thursday, your time, we have the Global Passive House Showcase, and this one will feature none other than Bronwyn Berry of the Passive House Network board. Her firm is Passive House BB, and she'll be presenting on how to transition to a passive house practice. So she's in a place where she's doing all passive house, and she's going to share her insights about how to make that happen for other practitioners. And that will be our host for the showcase is Beverly Craig of Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. She's the host of the showcase for the months of December, January, February. So we're really excited to have her on board as well. And then finally on Thursday, our time, Friday, your time, although it'll be really early in the morning for you Friday because it's
super keen beans.
Yeah. Yep. We have the Building Performance Interactive. So this is episode 3 of 8 Building Performance Interactives. This is a UK and Ireland based Zoom show and meeting that we are doing with co-hosts Dara McGowan, Mike Jacob, and Ben Adam Smith. And this episode will be about waterproof breathable fabrics in low carbon Enerfits. So Enerfit is a PHI certified passive house retrofit, and will feature guests Andrew Simmons, who's a partner in Simmons Mill Architects, and Tim Hulse, who's a passive house champion at EcoVert Solutions. So nice. We'll include links to all this in notes, and of course there are lots of other community events that are happening that we'll share a link to as well.
And while that will be live in the middle of the night for us, it will be available at a more convenient time later. So as are all of the showcases and tech videos and events that people can download, check out on the Passive House Accelerator website. But it's just really great to have our European friends and UK and Ireland involved, because it is global and what we do is global. So it's really cool to be able to have those sessions, even if it means that it happens in the middle of the night for us.
Yeah, definitely.
Very good. So much happening. Thank you all for listening. Thanks to everyone who helps put this show together. And thanks, Zach. We'll see you again next week.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew.